Okay, we'll get going in just a minute. Okay, we'll get going. Just a few minutes after 1. There are a few folks that might straggle in. And if you have to get up and go out, feel free to do so. We don't really have any breaks built into the 1 to 3 time slot. So feel free to, if you need to get up and get another cookie or drink or something like that. There's a ladies' room out that way. You can go around, and the men's room out that way. So you get the facilities all prepared. Don't trip over the construction. As people have noticed, there's a fair amount of stuff going on in the building. What we'll do is we'll get going. We have really a full agenda. So I'm Brian DeLacy. I just want to say thank you for coming and welcome. We have, this is an appropriate room to be in, I think, given the context of the international flags and the variety of participants, whether it's from HBS, Baker Library, IT, HBSI, HBSP, Grad School of Education, MIT Media Lab, folks from External Relations, Stanford Learning Lab, Indiana University. So there's really, and I've no doubt missed a few continents and other participants and universities, but it's really a great group of folks. So I hope that people get to know a couple other people in the room before the day is out. There are some great speakers. We're very, very fortunate to have people come. And Dorothy Leonard, who people probably know from HBS, has kind of set this in the context of what we're about with respect to the research aspects of it. Very fortunate to have both Professor Brad Wheeler, who's at the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University, and Professor Curt Bonk, also at Indiana University. It's a school that, if you don't know, is very well known and highly regarded for its course technology instructional work, basically in an educational space. Great to see some interaction between the folks from Indiana University and the Stanford Learning Lab participants, who we're very fortunate to have as well. Both Brad and Curt have been recognized multiple times for sort of their educational work, their teaching work, mentoring, and others through formal awards. And they'll give a little background on the specific areas of interest and their backgrounds as well. Next month, just a quick plug, February 28th, we have Professor Chris Deedy, who's with us from the Grad School of Education, who's kindly agreed to give a talk as well. So we'll follow up with more details on that. At the end of the presentations, we're going to have a discussion around 2:30 or so. It's going to kick in. And basically, Brad and Curt will organize that. After that, for folks who have the time and the interest and where there's sort of a spark of interest in having discussion groups, we have several meeting rooms over in Spangler for smaller group meetings of 10 or less. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Dorothy Leonard. Thanks.
I'm not going to read you all this, and it isn't an eye test. I just wanted to tell you that HBSI, we put in the context, the larger context of the mission of the business school. And here is the quote from Dean Kim Clark about HBSI and what we're trying to do. It's HBS interactive. We have a couple of people in the audience who are very important to that organization. Bob Fogel is our CEO. Judy Ewell is our Chief Learning Officer. We have a number of other people who are central to HBSI whom I won't stop to introduce you to. But I do want to say that the idea behind HBSI is that we will build on what we have here at HBS, and we're working with HBSP. For those of you who might be confused about the fact we have two organizations, let me just point out Harvard Business School Publishing, and we have a contingent here representing Harvard Business School Publishing, has had a new media group for about 5 years. And so they come from one tradition, we come from another, and we're working together. Their tradition tends more, having come from publishing and having a long and historic record of having published books, CDs, videos, and so forth, have traditionally addressed the larger mass market. We come, of course, from a tradition of working in the classroom, and especially from our executive education, working very closely with a few clients in largely face-to-face settings. And what we're doing is putting our various skills together to try to learn how to address the needs of all of these different audiences. Brian and I represent the research arm of HBSI. What we hope is that we will be able to bring experts, as we did today and as we will next week, both local and not so local here. We're also interviewing our faculty members, and we have a few representatives here. We have an enormous number of experiments that have been done by our own faculty, and they have incredible tacit knowledge about how to do some of these things. And so we've been interviewing them. We're hoping that we can pull together some of the knowledge that is in their heads, in the heads of people at Stanford and other places, in order to understand sort of what's the cutting edge, what should we be doing research on. So that's our mission, and we will be having several seminars. We're delighted to have you all here. Thank you so much for coming. I think you'll find that we have some extraordinary speakers lined up. So I'm going to turn it back over to Brian.
And I'll pass the baton quickly to Curt. And Brad, excuse me, Brad and Curt.
Passing some of these around for Brad here, so
Here, I can do that for you while you,
don't you grab
get
that
yourself
hat?
set up.
that side and I'll do this.
You got yours?
Okay, I think we're plugged in and going. It is a pleasure to be with you today, and I am just astounded that so many smart and very, very busy people would carve a little bit of time out of their schedule to come and talk about learning and pedagogy and the things that we can do. So I hope we can make the most of the brief time that we have available between the two presentations and the discussion sections to follow. Okay, leave the lights up, I think, is the message there. There are many, many things we could talk about. I'm from the business school at Indiana University and formerly at the University of Maryland. And since about 1993, I've been working very hard to figure out what we can do to improve learning and classroom pedagogy in terms of all the technologies that we have available to us. And being an information systems, a techie guy, I view the technology a little bit as Play-Doh that I can push and squish around and make things that I want and try them out in my classes. So there are many things that we could talk about here today, but in the limited time that we have available, we're going to talk about a subject that is near and dear to my heart. And the title you see is Breaking the Passive Learning Culture. Now, I don't know about you with your students, and perhaps your experiences may differ from some of mine. But sometimes I find students are rather passive learners. And we often think that active learning is better, and we as faculty have done everything but stand on our head and spin around backwards to try to evoke active learning behaviors. So we're going to dig in a little bit today to see if maybe there are some things that the technology can help us do in combination with a revised pedagogy towards driving active learning behaviors. And the first reason I bring this up is this famous quote from R.A. Degas talking about competitive advantage. And he argues, and I suspect many of you believe, this was written in Peter Singa's book and it's been quoted in many places, that being able to learn faster is probably our only sustainable competitive advantage. And I want to tell you, in the early 90s, after reading Peter Singa's book, and he quotes this and many other things, I personally felt a bit troubled at a lot of the things that we were doing in graduate schools of business. I thought we were, teaching a lot of things very well, but I really wondered, are we helping our students cultivate an ability to learn faster that will contribute towards competitive advantage? And I see things looking a little bit like this. There is a body of codified knowledge. We don't need to really reinvent how to do net present value or capital budgeting. It's well understood. We have master teachers who can teach it. And so there's a large body of knowledge today that we've become very effective at delivering through some variety of pedagogy. But yet our graduates are heading up into a world where, if anything, the innovation and the internetworking of human intelligence seems to be driving a force of change more quickly. We don't think too much in business strategies today in terms of 5 years. There's a lot of discussion about improvisation, a recent article in HBR, strategy as simple rules, being able to respond to a dynamic environment. So I've thought a little bit, what is it that our students need? What kind of skills do they need to work and thrive in this rapidly changing environment? And it seems to me it's a little bit of an 80-20 rule. There's about 80% of factual, codified knowledge that our graduate business students need to get and understand, and it would be a disservice to skip over that. But what about the other 20% up there that's these skills for learning how to navigate and assimilate and learn and draw meaning? I think we've got a very refined set of pedagogy that is well understood to serve the 80% at the bottom. But we're still trying to figure out the pedagogy for the 20% at the top. Now, our favorites, of course, are variations on lectures, cases, and textbooks. And without trying to get into any fights with anyone about their views of these particular methods, these are tried and true and very effective for a number of learning situations. But I'm not completely convinced that lectures, cases, and textbooks are the path or the pedagogy to where we need to be going to serve that other 20%. So let's think a little bit about bringing technology into the equation and what would we do with it in the classroom. Well, drawing on a paper by Dorothy Leidner and Sirka Harvenpa and the work by Zuboff, 4 visions for technology in the classroom. The vision to automate, so the students can go through drill and practice, self-paced exercises, things like that. I did them on the Apple IIe in my German class. It was a torturous experience, but I guess it actually helped me a little bit. The vision to informate down. Boy, we're good at that one. You know, you take the old overhead notes and you turn them into PowerPoint, and then you put them on the website, and the students download them, and that's the stimulus that is informating down to the students. Textbooks are really another way of informating down, and we're just moving some of that onto multimedia. And sure, we can make it more interactive and engaging, as the Harley-Davidson exercise that we saw this morning. Now it begins to get interesting when we think about technology, and that's the vision to informate up. Voting, polling, things like that. I found that one of the best things I've ever done. Have a case, students have to vote by midnight. I force them to make a categorical choice and to write about 100 to 150 words, no less, no more than that, to justify that choice that they've made. It all informates, flows up to me. I scan it the next morning before I go into class, and I know that David is opposed to the managerial action, and I know why. And I know Tristan favors the managerial action, and I know why. And I can have them vigorously explaining that to each other in a short amount of time. And when it's time to turn the conversation another way, I can call on Bob here, because Bob views this problem completely differently, and so we bring him into the conversation. Informating up, tremendously valuable, even to the point of, at Maryland, we had a device that was built. The students had 2 buttons. It's, I get it, please clarify. The instructor had a sliding red to green bar. Now you had to be careful. You couldn't be teaching the whole time, you know, watching the red to green bar to know how you were doing. But what I did find very valuable is you pause and say, okay, now would you feel comfortable interpreting this situation and explaining X, Y, and Z? And a lot of times they go, oh yeah, move on, please don't suffer, we can't suffer this anymore. But you know, if you'd ask the question more precisely and say, now would you be able to explain on an exam X or Y, it would go red. And so how you informate it up in the question was very important. Today, we're going to talk about the bottom piece. Example, dig in a little detail, the vision to transform. Can we step out of the box a little bit, rather than using just the technology to automate or move symbols up or down? Can we change the pedagogy? Can we really transform the learning process in some way? And so that's where we'll dig in a bit today. And I view this as the process of creative destruction. Dick Nolan here at the school wrote a book in about '93, I think. It was called Creative Destruction. I thought it was a great book. I love early on in the book, he says, here are 10 or 15 principles of the industrial age organization. The span of control principle, the annual budget cycle principle, and he lists all of those out. And they're Management 101. They're familiar to all of us. And then he says, here's another set of principles that I believe an information age firm will live by. Real-time budgeting, and he talks through a number of those. And I thought, I wonder if that same approach could be thought of in the classroom. So I'll say, here's some principles of looking back and looking ahead. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way, that the future is better and the past is evil. We're going to keep doing a lot of the same things. But we do have a looking back and a looking ahead. So some industrial age teaching and learning principles. How do we get to some information age teaching and learning principles, and what might those principles actually be? As with most organizational change initiatives, it is a journey, and it is this process of creative destruction. You remember Schumpeter is the economist talking about we pity the buggy whip industry, we lament the loss of those jobs, but hail General Motors and what that it did in bringing about new creation in the economy. Now, my personal experience at 2 institutions, and I have visited many schools that are making this journey, is the creation process is much simpler than the destruction process. It's relatively easy to bolt additional things on to the organization and the way we do things. The assimilation of them may be relatively slow. But the changing of the mindset and the destruction process, that's really proved a little bit challenging. So let's dig in a little bit deeper. Fitting pedagogy to purpose. If we think about what technology might do for us, if we look back, we realize courses are a bundle of some time that is synchronous, Tuesday, Thursday at 2 p.m. We're going to all get together and do something. An asynchronous portion, now you and your team work on this case and you turn it in on such and such day, and self-paced. Read chapters 1 through 18 for Tuesday, and then chapters 19 through 36 for Thursday, right? A self-paced part of the curriculum. What happens when we add information technology and possibly some new pedagogy? We would all agree that the proportion of those elements, we have new choices. Maybe we're going to use a small bit of synchronous time together. Maybe we're going to use a large bit. Maybe we're going to do more self-paced. But we have to decide anew and learn how to design a course combining activities that fall into those 3 elements. Now, I'd like for everybody to repeat after me. Harold Leavitt was right. Okay, here we go. Harold Leavitt was right. Harold Leavitt was right. And in about 1965 or so, I don't remember the exact citation, he talked about the mutual interdependence between technology, tasks, structure, and the people in an organization. And he made the observation, back when technology was really rolling along in the 60s, that if you're going to come in and change the technology in an organization, if you don't think about changing the structure of the organization, the skills the people have, the tasks, the way you do things, all of that energy is likely to just be absorbed and deflected and nothing come from it. Anybody ever been around a failed technology implementation in an organization? Yeah, Harvard HBS Publishing, you guys have documented many of them, and even a few successes along the way. So let's be smart here. If we're going to go into the educational environment and change the technology, let's learn the long proven lessons. We've got to think about the tasks, how we work, the shared assumptions of our people and the skills of our people, and possibly even the relationships between faculty and students, students to students, the structure of our programs. And this is one I've really had to work on a lot in building. So now we dig into the purpose of our time here together today, and that is there another pedagogical approach? Combining those elements, combining the technology, maybe to go after that 20%, to ignite that learning capacity in our organizations. Now, I teach in an area of e-commerce and e-business. And let me tell you, it is moving just at a lion's pace. It's just changing all of the time. You can take an elegant textbook that just came out on it and you look through and it's almost as good as reading a Dilbert book. I mean, you just laugh out loud at some of the illustrations, some of the things that were codified that we thought really were truths about taking marketing onto the internet and such, and things have changed. So I had the opportunity for this topic and this course. I wouldn't do this for Intro to Finance, or I wouldn't do this for Marketing 101 First Principles. But I said, could we take another pedagogical approach? could we think of structuring this class as a virtual learning organization? Now think about it. I walk in the fall, and I want to tell you, I read incessantly. I subscribe to 15 weekly or monthly periodicals, including sending several checks to you guys. And I read as much as I can. But in August of every year, I walk in front of 100 or more second-year MBA students who have been all over the planet working for e-business and technology companies who are doing very, very cool and innovative things. And e-business spans social topics, technical topics, strategy topics, marketing topics. It's the e-business core class for the major. And I'm supposed to be ahead of all of these guys on all of this wealth of topics? Come on, let's not kid ourselves. Let's be honest. I've got people in the room who know far more about narrow pieces of this field than I do. How can I leverage bringing them in to share and amplify their knowledge to other people in the room? Because if we're going to be able to learn faster, I cannot be the narrow funnel through which all the learning stimuli in this class actually flow. So let's dig in a little bit and see what we could do here. Now, there are a certain set of assumptions if we're going to make a big change like that, pedagogically. Let's talk about these. Read through them on the screen yourselves. It will look very familiar to you. You know, if the dean comes to me or my department chair says, Brad, I need you to go teach that executive IT leadership course. Well, immediately, okay, I need to make a syllabus. I need to think what the reading list is going to be. I need to, there's this checklist of things that I would normally do. But if we start thinking about building the class as a learning organization, like a consultancy that values knowledge creation rather than just knowledge transmission, I have to begin working with a different set of assumptions. And the students have to begin working with a different set of assumptions. So in the spirit of Nolan's book, Creative Destruction, Nolan and Croson, I think, and these are yet to be completely figured out, but I think there are a set of principles that are looking back, things we understand well, and an emerging set of principles for things that we're learning how to do, pedagogies that we're learning how to move into. Now, I've done this twice. The first time I did it was in 1996, about 5 years ago. It was a single class, 24, 25 students. Team taught with a marketing professor. We used Lotus Notes for our technology, and I learned a great deal from it. The next opportunity I had came about in 2000. I had a room with notebook computers, the students wired. I had all the pieces we need. Now, I foolishly agreed to do 3 of those in the fall because it was the launch of the new business major. It was very popular, and insanity drove me to accept doing all of that in the fall. It allows me to be here with you today without a lot of constraints. But so we recently just came out of this for the fall. These are all, again, second-year master's students. They've been through a core program. About 3/4 of them, this is going to be one of their majors, and a few are taking a class as an elective. So here we go. Now let's dig into the principles. Principle number 1. If you want to move to building your class as a learning organization, the professor's role changes. Rather than plan, teach, assign, and grade, your role becomes to craft a mission for a learning organization. Peter Drucker's article, The Coming of the New Organization, he talks about the symphony metaphor and having a strong sense of mission and a script that brings some clarity, but yet having all sorts of relatively autonomous agents who are interpreting and contributing to that as it goes along. And that the mission was very, very important to making that work. So think about it a moment. You walk into my class, and instead of getting the syllabus that we all know how important it is, you see this. And I'm going to tell you that 60% of your grade is tied to how well you do this. We have a couple of little evaluative exercises just to keep you honest, but 60% is tied to this. Now, I'll also bring out that we're going to address content issues for e-business, and the process skills that you will learn while doing this are a major part of the course. If you want to take a look at it, here is the beginning state that students saw when they walked into the room, class schedule. Now, you'll notice that does not look like 16 weeks of class schedule. There's just a few dates where some things are obligated. I filled in the first few weeks, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But there's a whole big part of the class that I don't know what we're going to be doing on November 12th. I don't know what we're going to be doing on November 14th. It's open. And you notice the mission is here persistently displayed. Anytime you come to the class, you see what the mission actually is. There's an FAQ, a frequently asked questions, section where I talk about a virtual learning organization and your role and what contributions might look like and such. So you come into the class and you see the mission, and that's what 60% of your grade for this class is. Now tonight, you're going to go home and do the finance problems that are assigned and due tomorrow, and you're going to read the 2 chapters for marketing, and you'll probably do the problems for the operations case. What are you going to do for e-business class? That's exactly right. You're going to do nothing, because many of our students, without telling them what to do, they don't know what to do. Now, it is astounding. I think we would all like to believe, at face value, very, very smart students in the second year of a graduate business program could take that and know what to do with it. I have consistently found that is not true. And it's no wonder business organizations, when they try to start moving to some of these principles, find they have to do tremendous amounts of remediation to students who've just popped out of business, you know, fresh out of the oven, but they have to go back and remediate some of these skills. Now, let me share with you just a little bit of some of the dialogue that went on. I've got a couple of things here that I'll point to. And first, I'm going to jump into the old course. This is the one that I did in 1996, but there are a few comments out there that I thought were particularly good. Now, in this course, we're going into the 3rd week out there, and I've given the students a mandate that we need to generate a list of topics that we need to have competency in. If we're going to be an e-business practice, well, we better be dang good at understanding security and business models and strategy and electronic payment systems. And I've given them a mandate to generate a list of ideas and start thinking about who would do what. And so we're into the beginning of the 3rd week, and just not much has happened at all. So I'm getting a little nervous, to tell you the truth, about this. And so one Sunday night, I hope you can read this. Allow me to read it to you. I said, over the weekend, I was thinking about how to best keep everyone focused on and contributing to our mission. And there's a link there to the mission. My first response was to create a form for each class member to complete on a weekly basis that would document his or her efforts towards the mission. I quickly realized that this was just an industrial age management response to impose control and monitoring. In a wired organization, the model for this class, each person's contribution will be evident to all. Thus, there is no need for my original tactic, as your contribution to the mission will show up in the notes database and in class. Oh, okay. Boom, boom, boom. Things start coming in, and it starts taking hold a little bit. Now, let me just follow this thread a little bit with some comments from students. Now, this is a comment from the marketing guy, and with all due respect, he was just an adventurous guy, and he was along for the ride and was very good in teaching, but he thought this was going to be a little bit loose. He wasn't so sure this was going to work. And so let me read this, because his comments are very interesting. This is about 4 weeks into the class. When Brad and I set out to craft the grading portion of the course, and by the way, he's responding to a student, it was clear that I was the more tradition-bound of the two of us, and so skeptical of fuzzy grading standards. So far, this database has opened my eyes to a new way to accomplish old goals. In a traditional course, exams, projects, and so on are the means by which students demonstrate that they, quote, got the material. In this framework, the student is an information consumer only, albeit with faculty playing a quality assurance role. Now, in our econ class, the whole model is different. The measure of success is the degree to which you have contributed information that elevated the knowledge and skills of all team members. We, including faculty, get points for contributing information, not for consuming it. I'm inclined to shift the grading scheme a bit to place greater weight on the real value of postings to this database. A lot of what is in here is glorified email, and some comments like this one are process-focused, but many are substantive. All in all, I'm inclined to apply a standard something along the lines of how much did person A contribute that was new and useful information to me and to the others on the team? Did she or he advance my knowledge or skills in any way? There will always be an element of judgment around the issue of what constitutes useful stuff as opposed to fluff, but most folks have a reasonably good BS filter. So one more, a comment from a student following up, and I've raised the font size on these. Mark writes, "You are absolutely correct," and this is several weeks later. "We have not had one class that encouraged, let alone required, the sharing of knowledge. I think that part of the class is the most valuable experience. When it comes to grading, I understand there is a need for objective criteria that can be applied on an individual basis. However, the risk is that the value of the, quote, knowledge exchange experience may get watered down. It's definitely a trade-off, but I think the goal of this class is centered more around the non-traditional cooperative environment." So it gives you just a little insight of how some of the thinking evolved for the course as it went along. So we set out this mission. We gave a variety of examples for how someone could contribute. And let me just tell you some of the contributions that were made. The students wrote briefing papers. I'll show you some of those in a moment. Some read a book and wrote a summary about a book. Others brought in anecdotes and stories from their experiences this summer. They summarized news, popular press news, things that were evolving. And they brought in a variety of contributions to the course in terms of a means of serving the mission, developing and amplifying knowledge and insight. Now, I did begin the class with some foundation material. Most of these were second-year students, but we read 2 books the first couple of weeks. There was a self-paced XML, extensible markup language tutorial, a CBT. We had some industry speakers, cameos from other faculty, and we did set out a framework for the course and how e-business unfolded. But on the schedule, that just occupied the first 3 weeks. And from there, the students needed to figure out where to go, what to do with the time, and I'll talk about scheduling just a little bit in a moment. Now, it takes us to a second principle. In a traditional learning environment that serves that factual, codified body of knowledge, knowledge is transferred via readings and lectures. Students are consumers. But if we want our students to ignite a self-directed learning behavior, interacting with a world of resources, let's not kid ourselves. We're not the narrow funnel for these guys. The textbooks aren't the narrow funnel for these guys. There might be somebody at Stanford that's got a better lecturer on infrastructure than I do. And a student with a little energy might go and find that. So how do we help them learn and drive them into interacting with a world of resources around them? Well, if we go back over to the course forum, and just one small tidbit on the technology. This was built in Lotus Notes Domino. You can interact with it from a web browser or from a notes client, either way. And I built it myself in an afternoon. So this wasn't any big, huge development effort or any big, hairy thing. Yeah, I, whipped this together in an afternoon, and there's some different views that sort the information in various ways. But we'll start off a little bit, or I'll move to the work products here. These are the things that came out of the end of the class. And here is a list of briefings and some comments that have been made on them. Those briefings are organized into some categories around executing business innovation, developments in emerging and enabling technologies. So these are the briefings that the students have actually put together. So for example, here's a briefing on Integrating enterprise applications. How do you get your CRM, customer relationship management software, to talk to SAP, or your enterprise resource planning software? Let me tell you, I'm going to be real candid here. I didn't know much of squat about enterprise application software and integrating it together. I knew a lot about this and a lot about this, but I hadn't really studied the piece to put it together. And here, some students wrote a beautiful, beautiful briefing on this topic. And I'll talk more about coordination and scheduling in a moment, but there you see where they've posted their briefing. The briefings were posted 36 hours in advance of the class period so everybody could read it. And then they come to class, and you might say, what did you do during class if you weren't going to teach or run cases? Well, we went through the briefings, usually. And it was another interesting experience. We have perhaps somehow instilled a culture that a presentation is largely to read a paper aloud to an audience, rather than an audience has read a briefing document in advance, and you are there to defend and answer questions and move that forward. And so that was kind of a cultural thing that we had to work on breaking as well during class interaction. So students were constructing, interacting with the world of resources, very, very current briefings. Now, let me make a few things clear. If I had organized my class based on some comments in the May-June issue of the Harvard Business Review, there was an excellent article here called eHubs, the New B2B Marketplaces. I know the authors. It's well written. I've sold a bunch of them for you guys in executive ed programs. Now, that's the May-June issue, so I go into the fall. I would have ordered that, and that would have been part of the basis for the class. Surprise! Look what happens in November, December of the Harvard Business Review. Somebody comes along and publishes Beyond the Exchange, the Future of B2B, where the author, Richard Wise and David Morrison, comes along and quite elegantly argues that the evolution of technology may nullify the value of these large central exchanges that were elegantly described in May. Now, did HBR fail in publishing the article in May? Absolutely not. That it was where the state of the world was and largely still is. But this is where it is going. So we were dealing with materials that evolved in real time. A student happened to receive the journal before I did, read it, and wrote an elegant summary and argument comparing the two in late October. I mean, as soon as the journal came out. That's the kind of behavior that I was trying to ignite among the students. So the results of, look at 3 sections. 95 briefings were written, hundreds of news summaries, less debate than I would have liked, but there was some of it. There you can see the weight of the contributions in terms of the 3 class forums. Each class was independent, completely independent, so I want to make clear. I would be reading 6 briefings on Monday night, because I would go in on Tuesday and I would have a briefing Tuesday morning about e-business in China and telecom evolution, followed in the 9:30 section by online principles of advertising and security in Latin America, followed in the evening by something different. Now, it was somewhat of a challenge to me to stay on top of that. The students could read from any of the sections they wanted to, but they could only contribute, and they were a part of one of them. We have pulled the 95 documents together, and I told the students this from the beginning. They have a replicated notes database on their notebook computers that is full text indexed of all the attachments, all the briefings. You can keyword search, sort by topic, by author, by industry. They have that repository to take with them. And so I said, so when you're in a meeting next summer and somebody brings up something, you'll be able to whip up and read a short 3-5-page briefing about that topic. Now, what topics did we cover? I won't even pretend that you can read that. But there you see the 95 topics that the students chose to investigate. Now, I've bold-faced a few of them just to be honest with you. I honestly did not know very much about the real state of e-commerce in China, other than generally it's going to move forward and it's going to be some challenges with the government. And UMTS, Universal Mobile Telephone Services in Europe, well, sure, they've been spending a fortune to buy 3G licenses, but I could stand up and probably give a lecture that might make me look like an expert to a number of you. But what I really know about it is about this much. But I had 2 European exchange students there who were all over that. Fabulous, absolutely fabulous briefing to the class. XNS, I had never even heard of XNS. It emerged during the middle of the semester, and one of the students picked it up and taught us what XNS is and where it was going. Now, please don't think I'm a slacker. You know, I work hard. I'm trying to stay on top of the state of knowledge in this area. But it just shows you what evolves during the course of a real semester, after-sale auditors, taxation. I had an attorney in the class, a tax attorney, back getting an MBA, who wrote a fabulous briefing over taxation and where that was actually headed for the net. The best papers, and I told them from the beginning, I will pick the 10 best papers across all courses, and they will be published on an external website, and that is the equivalent of making partner in the consulting firm. If you write the quality briefings that are amplified in the organization and that we're proud to put on the external business school website, then, quote, you've made partner. And there you see a list of those. If I toggle over, you can see this is a local version of the website, but this is the e-business portal into the school. And so if you come and, let's see here, there, if we roll over, there you can see all of the briefings that are listed. So these are public consumption briefings now. If you go out there, you can read the briefings that the students have done. I'm very proud in executive programs. I always tell these executive audience groups, hey, look what our students are doing, and our alumni groups. And so they see the value of these knowledge contributions and what our students are capable of doing. Okay, let's keep moving. I realize this is a monologue. I haven't accepted your questions yet, but let me keep moving so I can somewhat honor our time commitment. The next piece is the coordination principle. Typically, synchronous class time has been mandated by the professor. What would happen? Well, in a learning organization, using information systems, everybody can look into a calendar or a set of events and see what's open and see what needs to be done. So, you know, Rhonda would come to me and say, well, Professor Wheeler, can I present a briefing over this on November 12th? And I go, well, Rhonda, just look. Is November 12th open? Well, yeah. Okay, well, I guess you can. You know, and I just had to keep pushing back, pushing back. They were begging me to be the authority figure. Please, tell us what to do. But I kept pushing them back so they could look and see for themselves the resources that were available to them. Very quickly, if you look in the in-process category for topics, here's a variety of topics that have been proposed. If we were to look here on wireless technology, you know, pretend you can see those 2 little stars right there. That means somebody posted the topic for wireless. The first star means somebody grabbed it and said, I'll take responsibility to write a briefing for wireless. And then somebody came in, or Chris Schul did this, and he says, I'm going to post, I'll take the class period on this date. So all the information was completely open to the students for scheduling and coordination for what to do and when to present along the way. One more, the information principle. Generally, the information is hidden. It's just from a student comes to me, I grade it, whatever, I give it back. You can't see what other people are doing. But in this format, all the information was open. By the way, the students also did evaluations each day. If I were presenting, you guys would fill out an online form talking about the strengths and weaknesses of the document and the strengths and weaknesses of how I ran the class time. So course information was open. what should a briefing look like? Well, students, we had one student, we were writing 2 or 3, and one guy just stepped out and wrote a beautiful, manicured briefing. I mean, you'd probably publish it without editing. I mean, it was that nicely laid out. Very quickly, it started being imitated through the class because everyone saw what that person had done because the network enabled that to happen. Okay, let me take a few minutes now to give a little epilogue. Okay, you say, well, Brad, that looked like a mess, but it seems like you survived it and pulled it off anyway. What happened? What did the students think about that approach? Well, I have a little data, and then we'll dig in a bit more. There are the numbers, and if you take a moment to look across there, and I could pull more questions, but these are some ones that really hit on key things. I learned a lot. I gained useful knowledge and skills. The one at Indiana is the hallmark is, I view this instructor as outstanding. That's the question that everybody really looks at. So here's the data graphed, just adding the columns and such. And what it appears to me is we have a very bimodal distribution. And that's what I saw in the class. That's what I saw at Maryland 5 years ago. You have got a group of students that in this class, you have effectively removed the ceiling. In most classes, you do the cases, you turn in the assignments, you speak up in class, and you've done all that you possibly can, and so they've done a great job. And you've got some other students who are struggling to do those things. But when you take the ceiling off, I mean, go back to the mission. The mission of the e-business practice is to develop and convey as much knowledge about e-business skills as possible. How do you know when you're done? You can just keep on doing that and doing that and doing that. And for some students who have some self-directed abilities and passion, they just soared. I mean, just fabulous. And so I think we've got a group that really liked it. And we have a group that hates me, okay, that absolutely thought this was the worst experience of their entire life. Let me share a few comments from you, with you. Now, I'm not going to read everything in the interest of time, but let me hit through a few of them. The first one, I think, is interesting. I was extremely disappointed about this course. I came to IU and enrolled in this course because I wanted to learn from an expert in e-commerce. I am not paying tuition to hear my fellow classmates give their amateur opinion on topics they feel are important in this subject matter. I realize this is a new area, but it seems to me with all of Wheeler's experience, there is material that could be brought together to teach the basic and advanced concepts in e-commerce. The next guy, brilliant. Class was great. Brad facilitated lots of interest. The next one I think is interesting, student begging. I wish the professor would have indicated the subject matters that he wanted covered. Please, just teach us. Just tell me what to do. And it goes on and on. You've got the prints there. You can read through that one. I do want to read the next two pages. I was amazed. I sent an email message out to 5 students, some who did well in the class, middle, and some who did very poorly, and just asked, could you send me back a paragraph on the experience if you were explaining it to others? I'm not going to have them again, so I really wasn't worried about them, holding back. This is a student who was one of the overachievers in class, and look what he wrote. One thing I liked about the way S510 was taught was that the role all of the class was designed to take. I do a fairly good job of keeping up on technology, but there were still topics I learned about in the class. In other technology-oriented classes I've taken since, I've seen what it could have been like. Professors are, by nature, going to be focused on topics that relate to their own interests and therefore may be hard-pressed to cover other topics. I suspect you learned things in class too. I wonder how many other teachers I've had these 2 years could or would say the same thing. Having to make presentations in class brings home to students that, it's not as easy as it looks. These were not presentations like we give in other classes where you try to hide the fact that you don't know what you're talking about. The bar was set higher in this class because no one wanted to reveal they had little to say. The challenge is that not everyone in our class kept up the way I do. There is a disappointing level of expectation by my classmates to be taught in class, not to learn. It's hard to say which came first, but it has become a self-perpetuating loop. Students come to class underprepared for a variety of reasons, and teachers sense that it's easier to run through a canned lecture so all the learning points can be hit and a few students respond to the opportunities to contribute. I'd expected a healthier environment. Perhaps I'll have to get a doctorate to weed out the people who are less interested. This style of class was also well suited to the dynamic nature of the topic. New things come out every day, so cases on 3-, 5-, or 10-year-old situations are of little use. Ideally, the class could continue on. You'll see a few more comments there you can read. Here's some from a student, and he said, here's what I didn't like, and he articulates it. So bear with me. I hope you can appreciate I'm airing some dirty laundry here. Those of you who've gone into MBA classrooms, perhaps you've received a little dirty laundry along the way, too. I don't know. Some things I did not like. Here are some things that I did like from the class along the way. Let me hit to this one. Here are some challenges. They recognize the speed with which this is moving can be challenging even to the students, or I mean even to the professor. But here's a great quote I like. Said, you get out of a class like this what you put into it. Because some students were using this class to skate. Since I wasn't commanding what they were going to do all of the time, they would just, take some time off. So culturally, here's what it looked like. There's these classes and clubs that are taking up the fall semester for the students. And then there was the career search, which seemed to suck up all the oxygen in the room during the fall. And just, it was the important thing. And then our finance class is a killer, F520. So for many students, that pulled a lot of the rest of the oxygen. And then there was this square box over to the side. And one of my students at Maryland, when I did this, she came in and she said, Brad, I really like this class. I mean, it engages my passion. But my week is such that by the time I do this homework, read that case, do this, write that report, there's no time left. And so that's a challenge of this course, is the self-directed nature of a course like this, engaging students with the world of resources, is countercultural. And the students are so accustomed to managing their calendars to everything that is due, it's difficult for them to develop the self-discipline to know how and when to write and contribute and be involved. It's the student who says, I've posted 2 things. Is that enough? I mean, am I at a B+ here or an A? I mean, if I posted 2 more things. And I immediately put my hands in my pocket so I don't slap anyone. And, just kind of reinforce, point them back to the mission. Let me end with this slide. My experience in doing this twice is the process of creative destruction. It's information technology that makes this possible, plus a pedagogy. We changed many, many assumptions of the class. And it's a tall step, it's a hurdle to get over, but it's very doable for a certain set of courses. But beware the next step. That is the culture, that is the challenge to get past. So we'll end with the takeaways there. Let me ask my colleague Curt to come up and get set up. So maybe while you're doing the transition here.
You've been up to. Some people might be interested in that as
well.
well.
For those of you who have interest in inter-institutional courses, I've taught about 6 of those now, where we hook up with the University of Texas at Austin or Helsinki School of Economics or Singapore, and we run projects that may either be an event, or they scale up to a team project, or a full class. We haven't moved up to curriculum yet, but we've done a lot of those types of inter-institutional projects, just internet-based, with video, with notes, without notes, with forums, without forums, lots of people.
Let's see what we can do. Let me get a sense of people in the room here who have taught online. Okay, and keep your hands up. Add to that those people who have taken a course online. Keep your hands up. Those people who have taken a course online. Okay. Now, those people that had their hands up in the air, could I get you to put your hands like this? Okay. I want you to pray that my computer makes it through this talk. You know what it's like, taking or giving an online class. Well, my computer is going to limp through this, whether it likes it or not, and then I'm going to go back home and reformat the hard drive. So, well, we do have it up on the PC. So if it does crash, we do have an alternative. But I decided after going running with Brad this morning, all his wonderful ideas running down St. Charles River, that I would change my talk so that we would try and get education people to look like we know what we're doing, just like people in business. So I decided at about 10 o'clock this morning that I didn't change too much. So the handouts that you have going around are pretty well going to cover the things that I had originally intended to cover. Now, I do want to thank Brian DeLacy for bringing me here, and Dorothy and everyone from Harvard Business School and HBSI. It's really quite an honor to be here and to have a chance to not only visit with the business school, but the Graduate School of Education, stop over at MIT yesterday and so forth, and just wonderful. I also want to mention that IU has a quite sophisticated technology in education. And if any of you do happen onto our campus, I'm sure that Brad and I know people in the School of Ed would welcome you to give a tour. I'm always giving tours to people in our Center for Research on Learning and Technology, where we have many projects that are designing new technology tools, as well as researching those technology tools, creating online communities for teachers, creating the internet, Learning to Teach with Technology Studio to help faculty learn how to integrate technology in their teaching, and professional development. So we're doing research development and tool development, and we're ranked #2 in the country for public institutions with technology wiring. So we have high support for the internet. We're going to maintain the internet too. So there's a lot going on. Our School of Ed is a demonstration site for technology in education. It was built with pork and came on board in '92 when I arrived, so I came with the building. That was fortunate, I think. I think it was a wise spending of pork, but I remember when they christened the building, the congressman had to use that in his speech, you know, and just like, oh, you know, at least for once we have an institution, a facility focused on how to improve education through technology and pedagogy combined. So I want to also point out that the CRLT, the Center for Research on Learning and Technology, is within the School of Education. Again, anyone could come visit that anytime that you'd like. Okay. Oh, before I get started, you know, how many people read the Chronicle of Higher Education in here? You know, it's confusing as a faculty member when you read the Chronicle of Higher Education. I think that my theme here today will be about being a faculty member or an administrator who has to help faculty members or developers deal with this growing trend in teaching in online environments that Brad was talking about earlier. When you read the Chronicle of Higher Ed, it gets really confusing because one day they write a positive spin on the way things are, and the next day it's a negative spin. And we don't get a real sense of direction. They don't write an overall piece of what they've been writing about. So, you know, they talk about who owns software created by professors, and I'll get back into that in a second. Heads of accounting departments, and I'm a former accountant and CPA, so heads of accounting departments say they mistrust online courses. 94% of those responded, of 94 people who responded, only 36% think they should teach online. 82% agreed with the statement that student-to-student and student-to-instructor interaction is missing in internet courses. Now think about that. These are accountants. I didn't see much of that in their regular classes. I have a colleague who is in the Chronicle, and they put his picture in here. He says, "Scholar says learning by doing is the key to quality instruction in these online environments." Well, you know, it's true of traditional. And I think much of what I'm going to talk about today is going to apply to traditional environments as well as online. I think much of what Brad talked about applies to both traditional and online. You should be pulling those things out. Don't just think about it as these online approaches. Think about how you can change traditional classes. After half a course, a professor concedes distance education is not for him. What did he do? Stop? Did he quit? Did he leave the institution? Psychology students psychology students learn more through distance ed, but are less satisfied. Now, either that's a spin on a Budweiser commercial, or it's something that came out of the Kinsey Institute at Indiana. Think about that. Okay. This guru of online learning, and actually he's a friend, I can't give you his name, online courses of 1,000 students will become common, industry group says. Within 20 years, online classes with as many as 1,000 students. Here you go, Dorothy. Just talk if you want the answer to your question from yesterday. 1,000 students will replace traditional lecture courses on campus according to a forecast. I won't give his name, but he's from the Learning Resource Network, and it says, teaching a large online class should not present a difficult workload for professors. Questions from students could be posed to the entire class. Look at what Brad does. So that others may suggest answers. Any questions the professor does not respond to can be answered once for all the class to see. Instructors for large online classes probably could rely heavily on multiple choice examinations that can be graded by a computer, because grading essays would be time-consuming. Okay, I guess that's enough of the Chronicle of Higher Ed. And you can see my how disgruntled I've become reading every day. Well, I probably jump on that one as my first email every morning, right? So, now, if you want to get to some of the courses that I'm going to talk about, you can go to the home page. It's listed there at the beginning. And I actually have called up a number of the courses I've taught. I've taught undergraduate courses online entirely with where residential students. At the master's level, I've taught video conferencing with the web as a backdrop to it. At the doctoral level, I typically use online discussion groups to support the class. So I teach at different levels of web integration. If you want to look at that, and actually we train teachers in integrating technology out in rural schools in Indiana, and that's also off on my website. It's a project called Ticket. But if you want to go to any of that, go to my website, and you can get to the syllabi. Most of them are not password required. If there is, just give me an email. I'll try and get you as far as I can into the course. There are some restrictions. There also are papers that are there that I'm going to reflect on here briefly and come back to. So many of the papers you can print out on your own. You can explore some of the websites. If you stay, perhaps at 3 o'clock, if I can get Brian's permission, I might show some of them, including the Insight website from Houghton Mifflin. We have Lisa Mafrici here from Houghton. I've got that one called up that we designed. It's probably the most sophisticated textbook web support site that's out there. And I'm only going to glance at it just once here today. So maybe we can do that later on. Okay. Or just send me an email. And I'll get you what I can. I can send you things electronically. As Neil knows, who contacted me Sunday from another college somewhere, and I said, come on down. What does research say? And I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the research here. And so I'm going to talk about it very briefly in terms of the research. And we've been exploring at Indiana asynchronous discussion research. I've been in this area for 10, 15 years, but at Indiana since '92. We've got a book called Electronic Collaborators, the EC book. My editor didn't want to title it. She thought it was a Nazi spy novel, Electronic Collaborators. But I found I had a more humorous title when I got to Australia. They had to introduce me this past summer. They chuckled every time they introduced me. And then they pulled up my book, and they said, the bonking book. And I called LEA, and they said there have been a lot of returns of that book because people are disappointed. Okay. What does the research say? Any ideas? Well, I have 10 problems and solutions and benefits and implications of online environments. In fact, I brought copies of about 6 or 7 papers with me, limited copies, so if you want to grab some of these afterwards, most of the framework pieces I've got, including this one that goes through 10 problems, 10 solutions, 10 benefits and implications. And notice we only got to 7, so I've been in Indiana too long, I can't count to 10 anymore. But tasks can overwhelm students, as Brad pointed out. Well, tasks overwhelm them in traditional. Now you add these new pedagogical techniques into a class, add the web or other technologies, and you have to have some early online training and be clear about your expectations. Students can be confused on the web. They'll give confusion. The number one is it's a big excuse for students. Structure, timelines, due dates, and so forth are important. I'm going to try and hit the highlights of some of this early stuff so I can give you specifics of what's going on in my classes. So if I tend to be moving a little quick here at the beginning. Students are too nice on the web. They don't want to get critical of each other's work. And so I formed some role play, topics, scenes, and we have different titles that they might use. I have 28 different roles that they take on, and the blood letter is the most important one because the blood letter or the devil's advocate or the pessimist or the watchdog has license to be critical of someone's work. Now, we also created something called the constructive friend or the critical friend who's critical of your work, but they're still your friend. So that's halfway in between being someone who's too nice and someone who's going to lash out at you. But anyway, students are too nice on the web, so developing roles and controversies. Students' posts don't lack justification. We found that students weren't backing up their claims. Maybe 7% of the time they backed it up with textbook examples or concepts. And so we had to train them to back up their claims. And when my colleague at Texas A&M was teaching his students online, and my students were taking quizzes with his students online and writing cases online, they were backing up their claims and citing textbook answers. And when the students from Finland were coming online with my students, they were backing up their claims with research from American universities that my students ignored. And they didn't think it was that important to read research. These were undergraduates and so forth. And having an outside audience forced my students to start reading some of this research that they weren't reading previously. Having an outside audience forced my students to back up their claims with textbook concept answers. So they were pointing to page numbers out of the textbook and so forth. And also pointed out that I wasn't doing such a good job in getting them to back up their claims. So it forced me to reflect on how I'm teaching them to back up their claims. It's hard to teach and not preach online. But the research shows that if, and Bill Wynn did a study, that, and I've got a summary of about 200 e-learning related articles that I did for the Army. I've got a couple copies left. Bill Wynn did a study that looked at computer-based, teacher-based, and peer-based feedback. And the teacher gave feedback to everybody in the class, like Brad, and almost died, you know. But students loved the class. The computer gave feedback. Students hated the class. The peers gave the feedback, and students loved the class. Having human contact was what was important there. So have students take some lead roles in the class, as Brad does, have them write briefs. In my case, we have a technique I call starter wrapper, which I'm going to come back to, where students start the discussion. In education, we call it reciprocal teaching. You might have recognized that. Where students become the teachers, I become a wrapper for discussion, or a facilitator, or a coach, depending upon the semester. I've changed around every semester what my role is. There's too much data to go through and sort through. You're going to, if Brad read all those briefs, and maybe he did, he's shaking his head, he did. I use email pals, web buddies, critical friends, constructive friends to give feedback on students' work so they know they're going to get feedback from someone on everything that they do, because I couldn't. My department chair taught undergrad ed psych with 7 students the first semester and nearly died. And then he said, Curt, you can do it. I said, how many's got? 20. He said, you nearly died last semester. He said, well, you've been teaching some of the things online. You've been putting cases online. You've been putting online discussions. I said, okay, I'll try it. With 20 students, I almost died. Next semester I had 25. It wasn't bad. Next semester I had 30. It wasn't bad. When you get over 25 or 30, you might need some help, small amounts of help. But it gets easier as you do some of these things. But I also found ways in which to get feedback. Feedback's the most important thing in teaching online. You want to get them feedback from outside experts, from practitioners, from peers. Feedback is #1, and you can't give it all as an instructor online. So finding ways, or technology perhaps could give some. Communities are not easy to form. Embedding social and informal activities are important. 7 benefits and implications. Shy students open up online, especially foreign students that we have. So take advantage of asynchronous conferencing. Minimal off-task behaviors. We find less than 5% of the time students are off-task. The notion of being off in la-la land is a misnomer. Students are not. They're very focused and task-driven. They want to complete this task and move on to the next one. The biggest problem I'm having is getting them off-task as an instructor online. Why do I want them off-task? We'll go back to point number 7 previously. Online communities are hard to form. When we find that students are off task, they're starting to form these online communities. They're talking about their husband who's a truck driver, and they're coming in at night, and they're going in to talk about other things in their personal life, and they're all jumping online and so forth. They're sharing stories about themselves and little tidbits about themselves. And so finding ways, as Judy showed earlier, about the students sharing personal profiles and so forth. My school psych colleagues get mad at me because they are looking for ways to reduce off-task behaviors and behavioral problems. And I'm sitting over across the hall trying to find ways to increase off-task behaviors. Delayed collaboration is more rich than real-time. Well, that's kind of a duh finding, but we did a study comparing case conferencing in real-time settings to asynchronous settings, and we found that the depth and richness of the posts in the synchronous environments was much briefer, more pointed, more personal, but students wanted to get what they wanted to say out there, and they didn't read each other's posts. They just wanted their ego out there. In the asynchronous discussions, we got pages of students' comments online, and a lot of justified reasoning. A wealth of knowledge was provided in the delayed or asynchronous, where they could go back to their dorm rooms and discuss at their leisure. Okay, and we've got reams of data in the asynchronous cases, about this much in the synchronous, and it's to be expected. Now, there are places where synchronous is important, and I'm moving more to more synchronous for certain events. Practitioners coming in. We're bringing in a principal from New Hampshire who won all sorts of awards, and they made a movie out of him, and named Dennis Litke, and so forth. So we bring in experts online. We have office hours online. There are things you can do online. Students generate a lot of info. We do case discussions with students from Finland, Korea, Peru, Texas A&M, University of South Carolina, Indiana. We had 500 cases written online by these students. They can generate a lot. There's no way you can read all those or all the briefs like Brad was pointing out. Minimal disruptions. Students don't dominate typically. Once in a while we get a returning adult student who might take a controversial role every week in class, but it tends not to happen. There's not a lot of disruptions. There's been no sabotage to my system, even though it's not password protected. We had one problem last year. A student wrote a love note to another student. I love you, Arthur, on his profile, on his home page or profile page. That's been it. Nobody's gone through to try and deliberately sabotage my classes. So the worry that people are going to be out there adding all this stuff, and it doesn't happen. So minimal disruptions, so foster debates, foster critiques, extensive e-advice. There's lots of people out there wanting to come to your class to help you out. Take advantage of them. Well, don't take advantage of them. Ask them or encourage them, invite them in, bring them into your class. There are lots of practitioners who would love to teach in a higher ed setting. They don't have the time to teach a whole class, but they could come in for a day or whatever, or a couple days or a couple weeks. Students are excited to publish their work online. Well, if a student creates a glossary that's interactive for the class and has all sorts of links to the web to exemplify the concept that would take you weeks or months to do, you should be asking that student if it's okay to reproduce that, you know, and oftentimes, I've never had a student say no, but I've had students say, well, wait a minute, let me polish it up. After the class is done and they've gotten their grades, let me polish it up for you and make it better. So students want to get their work, as Brad pointed out, the top 10 people. That's a great idea. I wish I had thought of that one, but just it's ways in which to get their product known. In the education world, we talk about problem-based learning and project-based learning, and over at MIT, they talk about constructionism, where there's a tangible product. In effect, the web creates, well, sort of a virtual tangible product that students can put on display for other people. So those are some quick research findings, and there are many, many more in some of the papers I brought with me, and the long Army report that I did is also available, free to distribute. You can send it unlimited distribution. Off my homepage, you can download it and you can send it to friends. So it just came out, and it summarizes where the research needs to head, as well as what has happened in the past few years in online environments, the role of the instructor, and how to build online communities. Okay. If I'm talking fast, I apologize. I'm going to go faster. How old are the early web adopters? Well, we just did a study of 222 faculty who I would consider early adopters of the web. These 222 faculty had posted their syllabi to the World Lecture Hall, or had posted a personal profile, or given feedback, or posted materials to Merlot.org. If you are not familiar with Merlot, MERLOT.org, is a place for faculty to share by discipline web resources and look for peer-evaluated resources. I'm developing a website that I'm going to come back to later called CourseShare.com, which is also developing places for faculty to share online. But Merlot and the World Lecture Hall, the two that have existed. And we did a study of 222 faculty from there, and we found these early adopting faculty tended to be split down the middle, over 50, about 50, the 50-year-old, age 50 or older, about 50% of them, which was kind of surprising in that we think the web is a technology of the younger faculty, and it's not necessarily the case, because the faculty who are more experienced have tenure. But what does that give us? That gives us faculty who can mentor others. That gives us faculty who can give feedback on the tools that we're developing. You can create some wonderful mentoring programs then. It gives you faculty that might want to do freelance instruction once they retire, for instance, or even now. And now I'm going to come back to that question. So, so there's a wide variety of, in terms of ages, and this study was done by Jones Knowledge and CourseShare, and it's going to be available free in about a month. Now, in terms of ownership, who owns online classes? You'll notice here that the faculty believe about 16% agree that institutions own those courses. Not a big surprise, because I asked faculty. Now, if I had asked administrators, it would probably be 80%, you know. There's some tension here is the point about ownership. We also asked the question about ownership clarity, and they're split here down the middle. Half of them think, or about 33% think their university has clear ownership rules, 33% are not sure, and 33% disagree with that. How to compensate faculty for online? Not too much of a surprise here that they want a little more salary for teaching in online environments, maybe some stipends and release time and so forth. Recognition, some say no additional compensation. I know Brad and I consistently go back to our department chair and tell them, give us more. We don't want any more money. No, just kidding. What collaborative tools would help? We asked the faculty about collaborative tools. We asked them what they're actually using, and we asked them what has high usability, medium usability, and low usability. I'm just giving you the numbers. The red there is high usability. I could have put medium and high, and it'd even be higher, okay? But you can see that faculty like discussion forums, student collaborative projects in the middle there, feedback and annotation tools. You'll see instructor profiles being used a lot, but they don't value it as much, okay? They want some demonstration tools. You'll see over here, there's a big gap between what tasks instructors are using the Merlot and World Lecture Hall for collaborating with other instructors, but they want more tools to collaborate with other instructors. They want tools for students to collaborate with each other. Okay. What instructional activities are needed online? You'll see a big gap here. This is the biggest gap where we had between actual use and high usability. There's a big need for activities online. Why is that? I'll come back to that point here in a minute. Think about the courseware that exists today. Okay? They want a capability of doing data analysis and scientific simulations and lab tasks and performance tasks. But even more so, they want critical and creative thinking techniques for the web, which was one of those thank yous, because that's where I've been trying to address and target for a while. What web resources would help you in teaching online, or what do you use? Search engines naturally are used, online glossaries, web links, article, journal links was the biggest one. Well, we're talking to scholars who want to reference other online resources and materials. But over here, news groups, not so important, but colleague sites and general teaching resources are very important to these faculty in teaching online. So think about that as you develop programs, to develop some ways for colleagues to share what they're doing and develop online general teaching resources so that they can find out about their own discipline as well as in general effective teaching. Any supports needed? Now, we asked about obstacles and supports. I'm only giving you a very brief, this is just about a fifth or a sixth of some of the charts I could have thrown up here. But what supports are needed? You'll see over here that they want instructional stipends, they want instructional design help, technical support, time to learn to use the web. But they tend to have the technology in their classrooms. The students tend to have access. And what we've divided here is public and private schools. And we found that large public schools want all those things more than private schools. Does that mean that they're spoiled, that those of us at Indiana are spoiled, and that those at private schools are used to dealing with less support? I'm not sure. We didn't ask that particular question. But you'll see that the numbers for public are always going to be higher than those in the private institutions. In terms of obstacles, the biggest obstacles were planning time. There were a couple other obstacles for them, administrative support and so forth. Technical support was the second obstacle. And we also asked about decision makers, who's making the decisions about technology. I'm not going to, but basically administrators are making most of the decisions, except in private universities where faculty have more of a sense of voice. What % of time do you teach online? Okay, right now, we're looking out here 1 year out, 2 years out, 5 years out, 10 years out. 0%, 25%, 50%, 75%, 100%. You'll see the shift. Right now, people are about 25% of their time is online. In the next decade, they're looking at 50% of their time is going to be spent teaching online. Okay, so there's going to be a big shift that Brad was talking about, and we have to address that shift or that change. Are you interested in freelance instruction? Okay, we asked this question because I'm interested in finding out who's, and actually Jones, who sponsored this, has Jones International University. They need instructors. So they were interested in this question, but it got some interesting feedback. We asked who's taught online in the past for other people as adjunct or freelance. Not that many, less than 20% had. How many are interested in this in the future? About 75% in the next 5 years are interested in teaching in a freelance fashion. Now, we have some faculty who are ready to retire, so that bumps up the pool of people who are interested in this. But I think perhaps because the web is going to be a more known quantity and more stable environment to teach from. I know in teaching video conferencing, it's become more stable over the past 5 or 10 years. especially the last couple. And the same will happen with the web. Right now you get a lot of crashes. We're hoping this one doesn't. Okay. There's a problem here. Even all this data is somewhat positive in reflecting on pedagogy. The faculty are looking for pedagogical tools, and on average, these faculty had taught 4 courses online already, some mixed mode courses, and that's predominant. The research from Simon Fraser, from Linda Harrison, shows that most of us are teaching in mixed model. We have some live, some asynchronous, some online, some web-based. I'll talk about the 10 levels of using the web, but there's a problem here. It's not the problem with the person turning the crank there in our technology departments, but the problem is with the tools that we have available. And hopefully the people at Stanford Learning Lab and Harvard and Indiana, MIT, and so forth can be developing tools that go beyond administrative tools, assessment tools, and management tools, because what we're doing today, and what's disappointing today, is that we're warehousing students online. Now, some of these places, do we have any WebCT people in the audience? We do. Okay. I'm using it this semester too, just to make some points. We invited some. Okay, they're not here. Good. WebCT and Blackboard are the predominant tools that are used out there by most places. In fact, many institutions use both. But they'll say, well, we have these online discussion forums and chat tools. Those things existed before the web. We were doing groupware kinds of things and online discussions and so forth. Linda Harrison talks about it since the early 80s she was doing this, well before the web. So it may not be that they're lying, but they're not aware of the fact that the web didn't create these online discussion forums. They were already there. We were researching these in the late 80s, early 90s, these knowledge building tools and so forth. They haven't done anything new in terms of these new pedagogies that Brad and I am hopefully talking about here today. We have some presentation tools, some discussion tools, but to be honest, we've got, if you remember back to the movie Network, if I can get this audio clip to play, here we go. Okay, everybody on count of 3. 1, 2, 3. I'm as mad as hell. I'm not going to take it. Can we do this again? I don't know if we're allowed to swear at a private school. I'm as mad as hell. I'm not going to take it anymore. You know, Howard Beale was prophetic in this comment. If you look at the text from the movie and you substitute the word web, every place the word tube is used or television, it's the same thing in terms of control over someone's environment and whose political gain is it. So anyways, I don't think we've got the tools yet to say that we're going to enhance learning, transform learning, or extend learning, but it's coming. So what Ron Oliver talks about at Western Australia over in Edith Cohen, the form of structure encourages teachers designing new products to simply shovel existing resources into online web pages and discourage any deliberate or intentional design of learning strategy. He calls this basically shovelware, right? Okay, well, time is right for us to change. Let's think about some frameworks that can help us to change this current learning environment or setting. What do we need? I've been writing papers about different frameworks, and 2 weeks ago I decided to try and write a paper that would combine the frameworks, so I'm going to try it out here a little bit. I've been writing frameworks for psychology behind online learning, for the pedagogy behind online learning, for the instructional design techniques behind online learning, the role of the instructor behind online learning, and the levels of interaction that Brad talked about earlier behind online learning. So let's take a look at the slices of the pie here. Jack Cummings and I, my department chair who made me teach this class that he almost died in, then wrote an article about how we survived. No. We wrote an article about how to teach online relates to learner-centered principles. And we connected each of these 12 guidelines to the 14 learner-centered principles from APA. American Psych Association stamped 14 learner-centered principles that cut across 50 years of cognitive and social psychology research in other areas, and even behavioral research. And they stamped these, sent them out. A couple years later, they took away their stamp, and then they added 2 more to them. They re-initiated them. They're up on the web. They're free to download. But anyways, we linked them, and if you, my paper's here if you want to grab and read about the 14 learner-centered principles and how they relate to these notions of choice and facilitation online and meaningfulness and feedback and so forth. And then I wrote a paper that talked about my undergraduate class and the activities that I choose in my undergraduate class, like my profile tools, my portfolio tools, field reflections, cafes, and I linked all those activities to social cultural principles from Vygotsky that relate to building intersubjectivity and scaffolding students' learning and apprenticing students' learning and sharing knowledge that Brad was talking about earlier. That paper is available free on the web. It hasn't been published yet. So most of these other ones have. I'm waiting to do something else with that. But the second framework that we're working on, we looked at courses posted at the World Lecture Hall for the kinds of interactions that take place online. Instead of thinking about what the instructor can do to the students, what can students provide to other students? What can practitioners provide to instructors? And we looked at, here, instructors can provide students with syllabi and notes, instructors can provide instructors with resources, instructors can provide practitioners with news articles, students can provide students with sample work and comments like the samples that Brad showed. Students can provide instructors by voting, and this was mentioned earlier. In fact, Dorothy talked about voting and polling when she started out here, or yesterday maybe it was. Students and practitioners. Students can provide practitioners with resumes, reflections. Practitioners can give students internships, jobs, and field experiences. Practitioners can provide instructors with opinions about the quality of the class. We opened up and analyzed these courses, about 70 courses in the World Lecture Hall, and most faculty who are teaching online are not taking advantage of the bottom third. They're not taking advantage of practitioners online. Very, very, very seldom that occurs. But we got to open it up. Now that we're teaching online, who the players are in these environments are now opened up. The interaction possibilities are now opened up. It's no longer didactic from me to you, as well as student to student. We can now open up to consider other kinds of things. So if we're going to, in a way, we have to think about new ways to evaluate these courses then if there are different players and different interaction structures taking place. The third framework we worked on, it's published, it's in a book chapter, is looking at 10 levels of web integration. Now, I could ask you what level you're on. Some of you might grudgingly say level 0, but level 1, putting your syllabus online. If you recognize the UCLA people having the protests and the students protesting, no riots, but going back and forth protesting the fact that the faculty had to put syllabi up on the web in humanities, and then they were charged a fee for that. And now if you go back 3 or 4 years later, there are entire programs that are up online. That jump-started those faculty. So where are you in terms of web integration? If you put a syllabus online, do you put web resources for your students at level 2? Do you publish students' work, as Brad did in the top 10 at level 3? Do you have course resources that are very extensive, but they're not graded? They're just there and they're available. You're being a good citizen making resources available at your level 4. Do you repurpose your information for other people to use around the country? Are you at level 5? Are you doing graded activities at level 6 where there's something in the web, like discussion groups, is graded online? Or are graded activities beyond your class? Are you working with students from Texas at Austin like Brad is, or Texas A&M like I am, or Finland and Korea? At level 8, are you creating a whole class for residential students here in Boston? Or at level 9, are they outside of Boston all over the world? At level 10, are you creating programs? We have to create frameworks for faculty. My point is about these psychological and pedagogical frameworks. We need to have the frameworks first before deciding on the tools that are needed. Okay? Fourth framework. We've got, I went to the bookstore. We've got different frameworks, and I was fortunate enough to find, even though I was at MIT, I should have grabbed one of their hats, but we've got technical frameworks. You got orientation tasks, tutorials, and so forth. As an instructor, you've got to be a technician, in effect, okay, in teaching in online environments. As an instructor, you've got to be a manager out there. Do the students understand the assignments and the course structure? So are there due dates? Are there calendars? Are there grade books? I bemoan the fact that most of these courseware tools are only assessment related and warehousing students and managerial related. So you have to have that hat on sometime. There's actually a paper behind this. Pedagogy. Are you prompting, probing, pushing, or forcing them to articulate, weaving statements, getting some debate going online? How are students interacting, summarizing, debating, and thinking in online? And then finally, your social hat. What's the tone of the class? What's the general, where is there a human side to the class? Are there pictures of students that you've digitized up there? Are there cafes? Is there humor? And so forth. Are there stories that are being told? There are many more hats than this. There are probably about 15, 20, maybe somebody might say there's 100 hats that you wear online. These are the 4 predominant ones that come out of some research from Simon Fraser, from Lucio Tellis, and Stacy Ashton. And in my chapter, we looked at 4 classes. 3 were graduate classes, and 1 was an undergraduate class taught by 4 different instructors. And we analyzed the technical components of each class, the pedagogical, the managerial, and the social. And again, that paper's here, or I can send that to you. It's in press. Fifth framework. This is where I'm going to focus. I don't have a lot of time left, but where I'll focus the rest of today is on the motivational, critical thinking, creative thinking, cooperative learning tasks that you can use in online instruction. Okay? I've tried to analyze or create techniques that are creative thinking techniques, critical thinking, and cooperative learning. In fact, I published an article on this before I taught online. I used that article to create my class. I planned my class out, and it became very easy to create a class once I had that plan. I've repurposed this to just think about motivation. So we're going to just focus on motivation, but what I think has to happen, once we've designed an overarching framework for thinking about teaching online, then we have to implement those frameworks, and we have to create research programs, like what I did with the Army. We have to create tool development efforts, like what Stanford and Harvard are trying to do here. We have to create instructional design benchmarks, like what Blackboard and the National Education Association have recently done, creating benchmarks for teaching online. We have to create training programs for faculty and mentoring programs and so forth, and think about how faculty will be trained. And we have to have teaching tips online and other guidelines for faculty, and that's where I'm going to focus here. Before I get to that, I wanted to point out tool development efforts. What I think we need to do are create critical thinking, creative thinking, cooperative learning, and motivational tools for an online instructor. And here's one sense of what that might look like. As an instructor, you might call up templates, an overall template for activities that one would have creative thinking activities, brainstorming, journaling, reverse brainstorming, what if, semantic webbing, and that activity template would come up for your class. Those things don't exist right now. You might have critical thinking templates that come up, cases, comparisons, debates, flowcharts, taxonomies, and Venn diagrams. Those templates don't exist now either, but I think someone needs to develop the templates for instructors to teach. You notice the big gap I showed earlier. Faculty want to do these things. They don't exist. Okay? Cooperative learning. Templates for panel discussions and symposia and structured controversies, and I'll talk about starter rappers. We need these templates. Okay, now motivation. There was a recent study from Forrester of 40 training managers and knowledge officers, and they said many managers who responded to their survey said that they can't convince employees to take their online classes because they're text-based, they're boring, they were meeting with real resistance from employees who preferred the traditional methods like Brad talked about. Go back to give me what we used to have. Well, I don't think that instruction necessarily has to be boring online. Now, if you're familiar with my institution, you'll recognize the fact that we have different motivational techniques that have existed for the past 30 years. I know you've been around for about 400 years, but we do have our own history. Oh, I didn't mean to click on that again, but it's worth another shot. See if he gets the same, see if he gets the guy again. Okay. Okay, how can we motivate adult learners to participate in our classes? Now, you might think that we need to, throw things, like we do at Indiana, and just, throw them all and choke people and so forth. No, that's not what we do at Indiana. Okay, not in the School of Ed, not in the School of Business, maybe in Assembly Hall. Now, if I was to throw out what are some motivational terms, what things motivate people, right? Well, you've got the handouts there, so it's kind of cheating, right? You would talk about things like choice and variety and curiosity and tension and feedback and tone and climate and those kinds of things, being goal-driven. Well, I've got 2 techniques here for each of those 10 principles, and then we'll wrap it up. I'm going to go through these real quickly. 8 nouns activity. Have students introduce themselves using 8 nouns, and once they get beyond 4, I introduce myself. I say computer and wind and so forth. And once I get beyond a couple, it's really difficult for me to, and then they find out something about me they never would have found out before. Or coffee house. In a coffee house, put down your 2 to 3 expectations for the course, and the instructor can come back and tell you how you're going to meet those expectations right away in that course. Or as an alternative, make public your commitments on how you're going to succeed in this class. Students need to post that commitment. Now they have something to work towards, that goal to work towards. So if you post your commitment, you have busy schedules. Here's an 8 nouns activity with one of my students last semester. He said, I'm a geek in the modern sense, not the original definition of the person who bites the heads off rats in a sideshow. Movies. I'm a major cinema junkie and chronic addict of the Hollywood Stock Exchange. I won't pay for cable, so I check out 6 films a week from the local library. I used to project for the Writer film series until I got sick of the lousy equipment. Scientist. I think this sums up my approach to life. I like observing and trying to make theories about the natural world. I spent a half hour today watching a muskrat that lives near the creek in the School of Education. Knitter. I decided to needed a hobby. It had nothing to do with education, science, or technology, so I decided to take knitting. So I spend my spare time combining this with the last category of scientist. Now, these are things we found out about this student, a male student, who we wouldn't have found out otherwise, okay? Another one for motivation, the first one here in terms of tone and climate, scavenger hunt. Having students search the web for 20 or 30 things, it gets them some technology skills, especially if you're dealing with undergraduates, which I often am. It also might get them familiar with some of the course material that you're going to be addressing during the semester. 2 truths, 1 lie. This comes from IBM. Of course, they're lying at least 2 out of every 3 times you talk to them. But this is an article written by Rick Culp from IBM. Tell 2 truths about yourself and 1 lie. Class votes on which one's a lie. Tone and climate. Share a link. Share a link. Link ratings. Have students not just suggest a web link, but have them point out why it's important and then have them evaluate each other's web links. And we've developed tools for student web link suggestions and evaluations. Profile posting and commenting. Don't just put a profile. Create tools that they can comment on each other's profile to point out what they have in similar or in common with each other. So we've developed tools. Here's a tool for web links. They've started. We create a little Amazon.com thing here, and a student writes a comment and critiques the web link another student posted. And the students don't just post web links, they have to justify why it's an important web link. We want the critical thinking, we want them to back up why they're posting that. And you'll see web links for every week of the semester. We don't just post profiles, strengths, weakness, hobbies. We comment on each other's and point out what we have in common with each other right away. Feedback, second principle of motivation. Well, you want to have some self-tests perhaps for some feedback. That's the tool that's embedded in most of these multiple choice kinds of feedback and so forth. Reading reactions. Having students post their reading reaction and then reply to 3 or 4 of their peers and then summarize the discussion on their article. Forcing them not just to post their work, but give them a number of times they have to give peer feedback. It's very, very important. And this could be done in teams, as I pointed out there. Here's some, we use the virtual university. We've used e-education from Jones. I've used NiceNet. I've used First Class. You've used Alta Vista Forum, now Sitescape Forum. It's easy to do. You just post different readings and do your reactions. I slipped this one in. It's not in your handout. This is an interface for my undergrad class. I didn't dare try and grab this last semester because I'm just glad I had an old slide available. And you'll see different weeks of the semester are posted here. We have prior student work that they can go to in the class. They can go to a syllabus. They can go to cases that we've got online. And if they click on any week of the semester, they go to a little quad system here where they can go to chapter activities, their individual work, or they can go to the social side of the class and do online discussions. They can also post some web links, and they can visit their portfolios. In their portfolios is every student in the class, and it's not password protected, so we use fictional names like Leia and Java, and I'm Obi-Wan. And these little dots here indicated their work posted. It's feedback. The first semester, we didn't have the dots. So when their work didn't post after 5 minutes, they posted again. It didn't work. Then they posted again. We had people posting 5 or 6 times. These little dots saved me a lot of stress. Then we've got these little things. Troy commented on week 12, week 11, week 6, week 1. This is a peer feedback note. So they know they got peer feedback on their work. Feedback is the most important thing. This web assignments posting chart lists who's naughty and who's been nice. These are all the students in the class. The purple dots indicate their work posted. The orange dot indicated they got feedback on that work. It tells me who's up to speed and who's caught up in the class, but it also tells the students that their work posted again, and it's hyperlinked right to their work. So if you click on any of the dots, it goes right into their work, okay? It's in their portfolio. Engagement. I slipped that in there because I didn't want to run over to the web, and I knew I'd be talking too much and we'd run out of time. Questioning. There are different questioning techniques. You can do the shotgun approach where instructor puts all sorts of questions, and you decide as a student what questions to answer. Hot seat, where you put one student in the hot seat and everybody asks that student questions for that week or that day or that hour in class. Or the 20 questions where someone can only ask a question that has yes, no kinds of replies till someone figures out the answer to it. It might be used in a synchronous environment or an asynchronous environment. Engagement, polling and voting. Asking the students to vote on an issue before class anonymously, send it to the instructor. Instructor pulls out the minority point of view before class or at the start of class if you meet live. We have a faculty in the business school, Bob Jacobs, who does this every week. He pulls out the minority point of view before the majority has a chance to dominate. He uses voting as a way to equalize discussion online. So you discuss the majority point, you discuss the minority, then the majority, then you re-poll the students. Or Rick Culp at IBM uses this Delphi technique with time disclosures. Alta Vista Forum or Sitescape Forum has this. I'm sure other tools do too, where you anonymously post until a due date, and then that data gets posted after a certain point in time. 4, meaningfulness. I have my students reflect on their field experiences in education on the web about concepts for that week in class, and I give them feedback on how well they're connecting those concepts. You could be doing that in any area that you teach, business, social work, nursing, whatever it is. If they're doing an internship or a field experience, they should be reflecting online and relating that back to the class, reflecting maybe as a group so they can see each other's comments. So if they're in a bad internship, they can see that other people maybe have a better internship and are able to make those connections or links. So here's just an example of, I won't read it to you, but it's just an example of a reflection, weekly reflection. Case creation. I put a lot of this stuff in here on cases. I know at Harvard, you all are interested in cases, and I've been teaching online cases for about 4 years now. We've had thousands of cases posted online. But the first semester, I wrote the cases, and we answered 5 or 6. After that, we decided the students were going to write the cases. And they become fairly short cases, but they become personal cases. And students generate knowledge instead of us generating knowledge. And with this, Brad talked about transformation. Students are transforming that learning environment because they're creating the content and they're writing the content. So we model how to write a case. We practice these cases online. And then every student generates 2 cases in the semester, and they respond to 4 to 6 peers. They create 1 case in October, 1 in November. They reply to us, and we have students from Finland, the UK, Peru, and they're giving feedback to each other on their cases online. And we analyze the quality of cases. That's research stuff. And students they'll write about punishment, motivation. They'll write about suicide issues, cocaine issues, and so forth. And they'll get 20 pieces of feedback on a sensitive issue, on how to resolve that if they were a teacher in that situation. They can get a lot more feedback from their peers than I could ever give them. I could maybe give feedback to 1 or 2 students. These students, on average, are getting 4 to 5 bits of feedback on every case that they post. They summarize the discussion at the end. So we go into COW, called Conferencing on the Web, or Sitescape Forum, or First Class, or whatever it is I'm using that semester. Here's students at the University of Oulu, University of Jyväskylä, who are posting cases on different things like classroom management, motivation, religious issues, poor teacher behavior, learning styles, and so forth. And if I actually went back, you'll see that there are different total posts, 21 posts, 12 posts, 10 posts, 0 that I hadn't read, 10 that I hadn't read, and so forth, so I can find out which cases I had read. We went beyond posting cases to professional issues, and here's a student in Korea, I'm sorry, here's a student in the US who says the teaching profession is relatively conservative in their attire, but as males start to get their ears pierced, I wonder how this is going to go over in the education system. I personally do not have my ears pierced, and I know that when interviewing in other situations such as that, earrings in males have no place. But what about after being hired? Is it appropriate for males to wear earrings? As it becomes common for males? So it goes on and on about this stigma. And a person in Korea says, we have many regulations that prohibit a student's behavior like smoking, wearing earrings, necklace, growing hair. They just think the prohibition helps students' sound spirit and concentration. Do you agree? Some students, some disagree, some agree with this, but I think the expression of a student's character, some prohibition should disappear. Then a student from Finland comes in. This appears to be an issue that reveals vast cultural differences between the so-called Eastern and Western cultures. Body piercing is a new fashion trend in Finland about a year ago, and it's fairly common to see young people wearing earrings in their nostrils, eyelids, tongues, lips, and not to mention body parts that aren't visible to us. I don't want to criticize Korean school regulations, but as a Finn, and she goes on and on to talk about, we got cultural issues, some significant things. We were originally intending just case discussions. It became a professional discussion board. This grew from 1 classroom to about 8 classes at Indiana and about 5 classes internationally and a couple of classes in South Carolina and Texas. So got about 300, 400, 500 students online developing 500 to 1,000 cases a semester. And quite rich discussions. And what we ended up doing is we evaluated, we got student permission, we rewrote the cases that they created and created a set of cases called the Case Web for anybody in educational psychology to use. We created another set of cases for Houghton Mifflin within the Insight project for anybody who uses that textbook to use, including introductions and questions and so forth. So we repurposed all this work. Level 5 of the web integration, we repurposed what existed for other people to use. And we had quizzes online using these cases. They had to respond to 3 cases and two peer reviews of cases, and my colleague at Texas A&M did this. In effect, our students did collaborative quizzes online. Level 5, choice. Giving students choice, suggesting possible topics to discuss, as Brad said, and students vote on the topics. Starter wrapper. Students decide what week they want to start discussion. They have to read ahead. Someone else decides they're going to wrap discussion for a week. They summarize discussion. So someone starts discussion. I no longer lecture to them. I haven't lectured online, not much anyhow. I'm doing a little more as I go along. And someone else wraps up. I come in to facilitate where they've been on task, where they've been off task, what they've missed, what concepts didn't they get. Okay? So instead of focusing totally on my lecture material, I'm focusing on how to facilitate. Variety, brainstorming, having students come up with problems to solve, anonymously brainstorm ideas in a chat discussion, spin off ideas, post those ideas, rank those ideas. Variety, round robin. I start a topic, I send it over to Mike, who sends it to Kristen, who sends it to Bridget, who sends it to Monica. It comes back to me, I summarize. Okay? Curiosity, electronic seance. Now, all of you will probably say, I'm not going to do this. I did a seance once in my regular class. I never thought I'd do it again. A Japanese student said, I can't take your class because of cults right now in Japan. I heard you do the seance. So I won't do a seance anymore. And then I got evaluated for a teaching nomination. Everyone's slipping me these letters that said, the seance was the best thing we ever did. So I decided to try an electronic seance last year, and we convened after dark. I presented a modern-day problem, and we had to open up books from long-since-dead psychologists like B.F. Skinner, who I met here 10 years ago, last time I was here, and Dewey and Wundt and Pavlov and so forth, and we read quotes. They had to answer the question using quotes from the book. And so you'll see in here we had 52 responses to our electronic seance, and we had people like Vygotsky and Piaget talking to one another. Lev, would you have your students stand around the computer in a group discussing whether or not to push a button or not? A child sits here creating a virtual world, inventing and testing hypotheses. And they go through that theory. They have to become that theorist. My fellow psychologists, please excuse me for my tardiness to the seance, comes John B. Watson. However, you must realize that while you were out spending your precious Friday night talking to one another, I was having real fun in New York City, which if you know the story of Watson, you understand why he was having fun. Curiosity. Guest experts come into your class, find an article that's controversial, have your students decide. Do you want to bring that? I've got, like I said, someone coming in next week into my class. The students will vote to have someone come in, and then we'll hold a chat and we'll debrief. We might do expert interviews online. Here we brought in Bernie Dodge, the guy who created the notion of the web quest, which is not unlike the Harley-Davidson case that you showed us earlier. Role play, having students take on different roles for discussion. Let me just go through a couple other ones. Debates. I've had more success with student-generated debates than instructor-generated, where I post the debate. Students want some choice over it, but selecting controversial topics, maybe dividing into subtopic pairs. One posts the pro side, one posts the con side, and they might have to come to compromise at the end. They might not. And so you'll see some debate there. Interactive peer feedback. Pair everybody in the class who gives weekly feedback on one's work. What is interesting, missing, what hits the mark, what's important, provide criticism to the peer, as well as suggestions. In effect, the critical friends do not slide over weaknesses, but confront them gently and kindly. The critical friend reminds them of due dates. So here in my undergrad class, we created a feedback mechanism so everybody can give feedback to someone else during the week. Who do you want to give feedback to? Who are you? What week is it? Plop, it goes right in their portfolio. Okay? A little peer feedback mechanism. So they submit a comment on someone else's work, and they pick the week, and it goes right in there, as Chewbacca commented on week 10 or week 11, and then they can read that. Number 9, interactive, have a symposium of experts that you have online in the chat. 10, finally to 10, thank you. I'm sorry I'm over. Group problem solving, provide a real-world problem, form a committee of learners to solve the problem, assign a group reporter or manager, give them interaction guidelines. Each one does a different part of it. Now, I do this by having a jigsaw method where everybody in a group reads a different chapters from that book. You'll read chapters 1 and 2, Judy. Margie reads 3 and 4. Bruce reads 5 and 6. Dorothy reads 7 and 8, and so forth. And they have to summarize that book online. And they have to become experts and then present that book and summarize it to other groups. I guess I'm getting the time out here, so let me just skip over the last part here. And there are different tools for doing online groups, gallery tours to post students' work and put their work up on display. That's the Insight website. Final motivational advice is there for you in terms of how to motivate students online. My online course sharing tools are up here. We're creating a site for faculty to share online information and course share, article links, web links, syllabus links, teaching links, professional links, book reviews, discussions. A vision of what we need, last 2 slides. We need better pedagogical tools. We need better case tools. We need case tools that can link concepts together. We need case tools that we can bring in experts for expert commentary. We need success stories as well as failure stories. We need ways to share and mentor online. And finally, I've slipped this one in here. On the track of the faculty member in the year 2020. You could be a facilitator of a class. You could be a personal guide across one's class or career. You could be a technical specialist creating content for a class. You could be a course developer or a program manager, a work-for-hire online instructor, a freelance person, or you could be unemployed. Thank you very much.